The rain had been falling for 3 days straight when Vincent Sullivan found the woman half buried in mud at the bottom of the ravine, her white wedding dress plastered to her body like a death shroud. He had been riding fence lines on the eastern edge of his ranch, checking for damage from the storm that had turned the normally dry Washington Territory landscape into a treacherous bog. The year was 1873, and spring storms in the Blue Mountains could be deadly. Vincent had seen mudslides before, but never one with a human being trapped in it. He dismounted so fast, he nearly lost his footing on the slick hillside, his boots sliding in the thick clay as he half ran, half slid down to where she lay. She was conscious, barely. Her eyes flickered open as he dropped to his knees beside her, and he saw they were the color of sage in summer, green-gray and startling against her mud-caked face. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Vincent did not waste time on questions. He dug with his bare hands, flinging mud aside in great handfuls, working to free her legs from the weight of earth that pinned them. The mud sucked at his fingers, cold and dense, and he could feel her trembling beneath his touch. "I've got you," he said, his voice rough from disuse. Vincent was not a man given to much talking, having spent the last 5 years alone on his ranch after his parents died. "Hold still now." She tried to nod, and he saw the effort it cost her. Her skin had taken on a grayish pallor that spoke of cold and shock. The wedding dress was ruined beyond repair, torn and stained, and he wondered briefly what terrible circumstances had led her to this ravine dressed for a ceremony. But those questions could wait. Right now, he needed to get her free and warm before the cold claimed her entirely. It took him nearly 20 minutes of steady digging before he could pull her legs free. She cried out when he moved her, a small sound of pain that cut through him unexpectedly. He gathered her into his arms, lifting her as gently as he could, and she was lighter than he expected, all bones and cold flesh beneath the heavy, wet fabric. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he could feel her breath against his neck, shallow but steady. Getting back up the hillside with her in his arms was the hardest thing Vincent had done in a long time. His horse, a steady bay gelding named Copper, waited at the top, and Vincent thanked God for the animal's patience. He managed to get himself and the woman into the saddle, settling her across his lap with her head cradled against his chest. She made no protest, which worried him more than anything. A woman with fight left in her would have struggled or questioned. This one simply curled into his warmth like a lost child. The ride back to his ranch took 40 minutes that felt like hours. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the wind had picked up, cutting through his wet clothes and making the woman in his arms shake harder. He wrapped his coat around her as best he could while maintaining his grip on the reins, and urged Copper into a faster pace despite the dangerous footing. The horse responded with the sure-footedness of an animal that knew its way home, picking through the mud with careful steps. Vincent's ranch house came into view just as the woman's shaking grew violent enough to rattle her teeth. It was a modest structure, built of logs his father had cut and chinked, with a stone chimney on one end and a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. He had added the barn and corrals himself, working through long summer days to build something that would last. Now he was grateful for every bit of shelter as he dismounted and carried his burden up the porch steps. The door swung open under his boot, and he carried her straight through the main room to the bedroom, which was really just a curtained alcove off the kitchen. He laid her on his bed, the only bed in the house, and immediately set about stripping the wet dress from her body. There was nothing improper in his movements, only the efficient care of someone who had nursed injured animals and knew that wet clothing could kill as surely as any bullet. Beneath the dress, she wore a corset and several layers of undergarments, all soaked through. He removed those too, wrapping her in every blanket he owned before turning his attention to building up the fire. The stove was still warm from the morning, and he had it blazing within minutes, feeding it split wood until the heat began to fill the small space. He filled a pot with water from the pump and set it to boil for tea, then returned to check on his unexpected guest. Her shaking had subsided somewhat, though her skin was still far too cold. He chafed her hands between his own, trying to restore circulation, and was rewarded when her fingers finally curled around his. "Where am I?" Her voice was barely a whisper, rough and cracked. "My ranch, Sullivan Place, about 10 miles east of Walla Walla." He kept his tone calm, matter of fact. "You were in a mudslide. Can you tell me your name?" She closed her eyes for a long moment, and he thought she might have drifted off again, but then she spoke. Eleanor Blackwell." A pause. "I was supposed to get married today." Vincent absorbed this information without comment. He could see she was young, probably no more than 22 or 23, with dark hair that might be beautiful when it was not matted with mud. Her features were delicate, almost fragile, but there was something in the set of her jaw that suggested strength beneath the surface. "What happened?" he asked. "I ran." The words came out flat, without emotion. He was not a good man. I realized it too late, standing there in the church with everyone watching, so I ran. She opened her eyes and looked at him directly. "I took a horse from the livery and just rode. I did not know where I was going. The storm came up so fast and the horse spooked, threw me near the edge of the ravine. I tried to climb down to find shelter, but the ground just gave way beneath me." Vincent nodded slowly. He could picture it easily enough, a woman in a panic making desperate decisions, nature turning against her at the worst possible moment. "The horse, gone, ran off when I fell." A tremor ran through her that had nothing to do with cold. "They will be looking for me. Thomas, my intended, he is not the kind of man who accepts being humiliated. And my father, he arranged the marriage. He will be furious." "You are safe here," Vincent said, and meant it with a fierce certainty that surprised him. "No one is taking you anywhere until you are well and ready to make your own choices." She studied his face for a long moment, searching for something, and whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she relaxed slightly into the blankets. "Thank you. I do not even know your name." "Vincent Sullivan. Most people just call me Sullivan." He released her hand and stood, moving back to the stove to check the water. "You need to warm up from the inside. I am going to make you some tea, and then you should try to eat something." "I am not sure I can. You will try anyway." He said it gently but firmly, and saw the smallest hint of a smile touch her lips. Over the next hour, Vincent worked to restore Eleanor to something approaching human warmth and comfort. He got hot tea into her, sweetened with honey from his own hives, and followed it with warm broth from the perpetual pot he kept simmering on the back of the stove. She managed 3 spoonfuls before her eyes began to droop with exhaustion. He let her sleep then, pulling a chair close to the bed so he could monitor her breathing. Outside, the rain picked up again, drumming against the roof with renewed intensity. Vincent sat in the growing darkness and thought about the woman sleeping in his bed. He was 30 years old and had not had a woman under his roof since his mother died. He had not wanted one, content with his solitude and his work. The ranch kept him busy from dawn until well after dark most days, and he told himself he had no time for complications. But looking at Eleanor's sleeping face, still streaked with mud he had missed in his haste, he felt something shift in his chest. A protectiveness, certainly, but something more as well. An awareness of her as a person, a woman with her own story and struggles who had trusted him with her safety. He rose and lit a lamp, keeping it low so as not to wake her, and went about the evening chores he could do inside. There was bread to bake for tomorrow, leather tack that needed mending, accounts to update in his ledger. He worked quietly, frequently checking on Eleanor, and was surprised when he realized several hours had passed. The rain showed no signs of stopping, and he knew the roads would be impassable by morning. Good. It meant no one would be coming around asking questions. Eleanor woke near midnight, stirring restlessly before her eyes opened. Vincent was there immediately, a cup of water in his hand. She drank gratefully, and he could see the color had returned to her cheeks. The grayish pallor was gone, replaced by healthy pink skin. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like I was buried in mud and left for dead." But there was a hint of humor in her voice that had not been there before. "Better than I did, though. You saved my life. Anyone would have done the same." "No," she shook her head slightly, "not anyone. Some men would have seen an opportunity. A woman alone and helpless. You saw someone who needed help, and you gave it without asking anything in return. That says something about who you are." Vincent felt heat rise in his face and was grateful for the dim lamplight. He was not accustomed to compliments or close observation. "You need to rest more. Your body has been through a shock." "Will you tell me about yourself?" Eleanor asked. "It would help me settle. I feel strange, lying here in your home, knowing nothing about you except your name and that you are uncommonly decent." So Vincent talked, something he almost never did, telling her about the ranch and how his parents had homesteaded it 30 years ago when the land was still wild and dangerous. He told her about his mother's death from fever when he was 20, and his father's passing 3 years later from a bad fall off a roof he was repairing. He talked about the work of running a cattle ranch alone, the early mornings and late nights, the satisfaction of watching his herd grow year by year. He did not mention the loneliness, but he thought perhaps she heard it anyway in the spaces between his words. Eleanor listened without interrupting, her eyes never leaving his face. When he finally ran out of things to say, she was quiet for a moment before speaking. "You are lonely," she said softly. "You have built something good here, but you have no one to share it with. I have my work." "Work is not the same as companionship." She shifted slightly under the blankets, wincing a little. "I was lonely too in my father's house. That is part of why I agreed to the marriage in the first place. I thought anything would be better than the isolation I felt, but Thomas was worse. He was cruel in small ways that other people did not see. The way he spoke to servants, the way he looked at me like I was property he had purchased, I could not go through with it." "What will you do now?" Vincent asked. "When you are well enough to leave, where will you go?" "I do not know." The admission seemed to cost her. "I have no money, no prospects. My father will disown me for this if he has not already. Thomas will make sure I am ruined in Walla Walla society. I suppose I could try to find work somewhere as a seamstress or a teacher, but without references." She trailed off, and he could see the worry clouding her eyes. "You could stay here." The words were out before Vincent had fully thought them through, but once spoken, he did not want to take them back. Eleanor's eyes widened. "Stay here. But I cannot simply move into your home." "The scandal alone would." "Who would know?" Vincent interrupted. "We are 10 miles from town, and I do not get visitors. You could stay until you figure out what you want to do next, or longer if you wanted. I could use help around the place, and it would be proper if we arranged it right. You could be my housekeeper in name at least, with your own room. I could partition off part of the main room, build you a proper bedroom with a door." Eleanor stared at him as if he had sprouted a second head. "You do not even know me. Why would you offer such a thing?" Vincent considered the question carefully before answering. "Because you need help, and I have the means to give it. Because I do not think anyone should be forced into a marriage they do not want, and because—" He paused, then finished honestly, because I think you are someone worth knowing. A blush spread across Eleanor's face, visible even in the lamplight. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. That is the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me. You do not have to decide now, Vincent said quickly, suddenly worried he had overstepped. Rest and heal first. We can talk more when you are stronger. But Eleanor was shaking her head. I do not need to think about it. Yes, I would like to stay at least for a while, if you are truly certain you do not mind. I am certain. They looked at each other across the dim room, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding or perhaps the beginning of one. Vincent felt his heart do something strange in his chest, a flutter he had not experienced since he was a boy. He cleared his throat and stood abruptly. You should sleep more. I will be right here if you need anything. Where will you sleep? Eleanor asked, suddenly concerned. I have taken your bed. I have slept in worse places than a chair. Do not worry about me. He settled back into the chair and pulled a blanket over himself, trying to ignore how uncomfortable it was going to be. But when he glanced over at Eleanor, she was already asleep again, her breathing deep and even, and he thought that a few uncomfortable nights were a small price to pay for the peace he saw on her face. The rain continued through the night and into the next day. Vincent woke stiff and sore, his back protesting the hours spent in the chair, but he pushed through it. Eleanor was still sleeping, so he moved quietly around the kitchen, stoking the fire and putting coffee on to boil. The morning chores could not be avoided, rain or no rain, and he pulled on his slicker and headed out to feed the horses and check on the cattle. The ranch yard was a sea of mud. The barn sat on higher ground, protected from the worst of it, but the corrals were ankle-deep in muck. Vincent worked through his tasks methodically, his mind only half on what he was doing. The other half was back in the house with the woman sleeping in his bed, wondering what he had gotten himself into. He had lived alone for so long that the prospect of sharing his space with someone was both thrilling and terrifying. When he returned to the house, Eleanor was awake and sitting up in bed, looking considerably better than she had the night before. She had found the wash basin and cleaned the remaining mud from her face and hands, and her hair, though still tangled, was no longer matted with dirt. She smiled when she saw him, a real smile that transformed her features from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. "Good morning," she said. "I hope I did not use all your water. There is plenty more." Vincent hung his slicker by the door and poured himself coffee, then raised the pot in question. "Would you like some? Please." He brought her a cup, noting that she held it carefully with both hands as if treasuring the warmth. She sipped and made a small sound of appreciation. "This is good, better than what we had at home. I order the beans from San Francisco, one of my few indulgences." Vincent leaned against the kitchen table, studying her. "How are you feeling?" "Sore, tired, but much better than yesterday." She set down the cup and looked at him seriously. "I want to thank you properly. You saved my life, and then you offered me shelter and kindness when you had no reason to. I will not forget that. It is done. No need to keep thanking me." Vincent felt uncomfortable with her gratitude, though he could not say why. "Are you hungry? I can make breakfast. I do not want to be more of a burden than I already am. If you point me toward the kitchen, I can cook. You are not a burden. And you should rest at least another day before you start moving around too much." But even as he said it, Eleanor was pushing back the blankets and swinging her legs over the side of the bed. She was wearing one of his shirts, which fell nearly to her knees, and he quickly looked away, feeling heat in his face again. "I have rested enough," she said firmly. "I am not the kind of woman who can lie about while others work. Please let me help. It will make me feel less useless." Vincent recognized the stubbornness in her tone, having heard the same quality in his own voice often enough. All right, but if you start to feel faint, you sit down immediately. Understood? Understood. They worked together to prepare breakfast, moving around the small kitchen with an ease that surprised them both. Eleanor proved to be a skilled cook, turning Vincent's basic supplies into a meal of eggs, bacon, biscuits, and gravy that was far superior to anything he usually managed. They ate at the small table, and Vincent found himself enjoying the simple companionship of sharing a meal with someone. It had been so long since he had done so that he had forgotten how pleasant it could be. "Tell me about the ranch," Eleanor said between bites. "How many head of cattle do you run?" "About 200 right now. I started with 50 that my father left me and built up from there. It is not a large operation, but it is enough for one man to handle, and it turns a decent profit." "Do you sell locally or drive them to market?" "Both. I sell breeding stock to local ranchers, and once a year I join up with some of the bigger outfits for a drive to the railroad in Wallula. The meat buyers there pay top dollar for good beef." He paused, then added, "I have been thinking about expanding, maybe running 300 or 400 head, but that would require hiring help, and I have not gotten around to it." "Why not?" Vincent shrugged. "Hiring someone means having them around all the time, sharing the work and the decisions. I have gotten used to doing things my own way." "You mean you have gotten used to being alone," Eleanor said gently. "There is a difference." He could not argue with that, so he changed the subject. "What about you? What were you doing before the wedding that was not?" Eleanor's expression grew troubled. "I lived with my father in town. My mother died when I was young, and he raised me with the help of a succession of housekeepers. He owns the bank in Walla Walla, and when Thomas applied for a loan to expand his freight business, my father saw an opportunity. Thomas needed money, and my father wanted connections to the freight trade. I was the bargaining chip that sealed the deal. That is no way to treat a daughter. My father does not see me as a daughter. He sees me as an asset to be deployed for maximum advantage." The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. "I tried to be a good daughter, to do what he wanted, to be grateful for the home and food he provided. But when I stood in that church and looked at Thomas, really looked at him, I saw my future stretched out before me. Years of being treated as property, of being diminished and controlled. I could not do it, so I ran." Vincent reached across the table and covered her hand with his own. "You did the right thing. It took courage to choose yourself over what everyone expected of you." Eleanor's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I hope you are right. Right now it feels like I have destroyed my entire life for nothing." "You have not destroyed anything. You have just changed its direction." He squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "Life is long, Eleanor. You have time to build something new." "Is that what you did after your parents died?" "In a way. I could have sold the ranch and moved to the city, tried to make a life there. But I chose to stay and build on what they started. It has been hard work and lonely sometimes, but it is mine. I answer to no one but myself, and there is freedom in that." Eleanor nodded slowly, and he could see her turning his words over in her mind. They finished breakfast in comfortable silence, and then Eleanor insisted on washing the dishes while Vincent worked on clearing a space in the main room for a new bedroom. The house was not large, but there was room enough if he arranged things carefully. He spent the morning measuring and planning, occasionally asking Eleanor's opinion on placement or size. She offered thoughtful suggestions, and he found himself valuing her input. By midday the rain had finally stopped, though the sky remained heavy and gray. Vincent took advantage of the break to do more work outside, repairing fence lines damaged by the storm and checking for lost or injured cattle. Eleanor watched him go with a wistful expression, and when he returned hours later, muddy and exhausted, He found her knitting by the fire with yarn and needles she had discovered in a trunk that had belonged to his mother. "I hope you do not mind," she said, gesturing to the knitting. "I found these things and thought they should be used rather than sitting forgotten. My mother would be glad to know her things were being put to good use." Vincent stripped off his muddy boots and hung his hat on its peg. "What are you making?" "A scarf. Winter will be here before you know it, and I noticed you only have one." She held up her work for inspection, and he could see it was coming along nicely, the stitches even and tight. "I am a fair hand with knitting and sewing. If you have any mending that needs doing, I would be happy to help." "There is always mending on a ranch." Vincent poured himself water from the pitcher and drank deeply. "But you do not have to earn your keep through chores, Eleanor. I meant what I said about you being welcome here." "I know you did, but I need to feel useful. Please let me contribute." Over the following days, they fell into a routine. Vincent worked the ranch, doing the endless tasks that kept the place running, while Eleanor took over the cooking and household management. She proved to be remarkably capable, transforming the bachelor's quarters into something more homely. She cleaned corners Vincent had not realized needed cleaning, aired out blankets and curtains, organized the pantry, and cooked meals that made him look forward to coming inside at the end of each day. But more than the practical contributions, Eleanor brought life to the house. She hummed while she worked, filling the silence Vincent had grown so accustomed to with melody. She asked questions about everything, genuinely interested in the workings of the ranch and his life. She made him laugh with her observations about the chickens' personalities and the horses' quirks. Slowly, without him quite realizing it was happening, she became essential to his days. Vincent found himself hurrying through his work so he could get back to the house, back to her. He lingered over meals, drawing out conversations, reluctant to let the moments end. He built her the bedroom he had promised, working late into the evenings to frame walls and hang a door, but when it was finished, he felt an unexpected disappointment that she would no longer be sleeping in the same room, even separated by a curtain. Eleanor seemed to feel the change between them as well. He caught her watching him sometimes with an expression he could not quite read, thoughtful and assessing. She began to anticipate his needs, having coffee ready when he came in from early morning chores, leaving warmed water for washing after particularly dirty jobs. Small kindnesses that spoke of care and attention. 3 weeks after he had pulled her from the mud, Vincent was mending tack in the barn when Eleanor appeared in the doorway, a basket over her arm. "I brought you something to eat," she said, stepping into the dim interior. "You missed the noon meal." "Did I? I lost track of time." Vincent set aside the bridle he was working on and wiped his hands on his pants. "Thank you." She had packed bread and cheese and cold chicken, with apples from the root cellar for after. They sat on hay bales and ate together, the comfortable silence between them broken only by the sounds of horses moving in their stalls. "Vincent," Eleanor said after a while, her voice hesitant, "I have been thinking about my situation, about what comes next." His heart sank. He had known this conversation was coming, had been dreading it. "What have you decided?" "I cannot hide here forever. Eventually someone will come looking, or I will need to go into town for supplies and I will be seen. When that happens, there will be questions and rumors. I do not want to bring trouble to your door. Let them talk. I do not care what people say. But I do." Eleanor turned to face him fully. "Your reputation matters, Vincent. You have to do business with these people, sell them cattle, buy supplies. If I am here as your housekeeper but we are not related and I have no husband, people will assume things. Ugly things that could hurt you." "Then what do you suggest?" Vincent asked, though he had a sinking feeling he knew what she was going to say. "I should leave." Go somewhere far from here where no one knows me, where I can start fresh without the shadow of my failed wedding following me." She said it firmly, but he could hear the uncertainty beneath the words. "Is that what you want? It is what makes sense." "That is not what I asked." Vincent set down his food and shifted closer to her on the hay bale. "Eleanor, do you want to leave?" She was quiet for a long moment, her hands twisting in her lap. "No," she finally whispered. "I do not want to leave. I am happier here than I have been anywhere. But I do not see how I can stay without causing you harm." "There is a way." Vincent's heart was pounding so hard he was sure she must hear it. "You could stay as my wife." Eleanor's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "What? Marry me?" "Not for convenience or appearance, though it would solve that problem. Marry me because I have come to care for you these past weeks, because I think we suit each other, because I want you to stay, not as a housekeeper or a guest, but as a partner." The words tumbled out faster now, urgent. "I know it is sudden. I know you just escaped one unwanted marriage, but this would be different. I would be different. I would never try to control you or diminish you. You would have a say in everything, equal voice in all decisions. And if you need time, we can wait. But I want you to know that I am offering if you are willing." Eleanor stared at him, tears streaming down her face. "You want to marry me?" "Yes, but you barely know me." "I know enough. I know you are brave and kind. I know you work hard and do not complain. I know you make me laugh and make me want to be a better man. I know that when I think about you leaving, it feels like something important would leave with you." Vincent reached out and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. "I am not a romantic man, Eleanor. I do not have pretty words or grand gestures, but I am honest, and I am telling you honestly that I want you to stay. As my wife, if you will have me." "I thought you valued your solitude," Eleanor said, her voice shaking. "You told me you had gotten used to doing things your own way." "I was wrong. Solitude is not the same as peace, and I did not know the difference until you came here." He took her hands in his, feeling them tremble. "You do not have to answer now. Think about it. Take all the time you need." "I do not need time." Eleanor's voice was stronger now, certain. "Yes, I will marry you." Vincent felt joy surge through him, pure and unexpected. "You will, I will. You are nothing like Thomas, nothing like any man I have ever known. You see me, really see me, not as property or a burden, but as a person. And I have come to care for you too these past weeks. I did not let myself think about it, did not let myself hope, but now that you have asked." She smiled through her tears. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that held promise and hope. Eleanor leaned into him, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. And for a long moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them in the dim barn, with dust motes dancing in the shafts of light. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, and Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "We should do it soon. Go into town and find a preacher before anyone realizes you are here. Will people recognize me? Probably. But as my wife, you will have my protection and my name. Let them try to say something then." There was a fierceness in his voice that made Eleanor smile. "My fierce cowboy," she murmured. "All right, let us do it soon. Tomorrow if we can." They rode into Walla Walla the next day, both dressed in their best clothes. Vincent had a suit he wore perhaps once a year, and Eleanor had fashioned a dress from fabric she found in his mother's trunk, working through the night by lamplight to have it ready. It was simple, pale blue cotton with white trim, but she looked beautiful in it. The town was busy with midday traffic, and Vincent felt Eleanor tense beside him as they rode down Main Street. People stared, and he could see recognition dawn on several faces. There would be talk, certainly, but he did not care. Eleanor was with him by choice, and that was all that mattered. They found the Methodist preacher at his church, a kindly man named Reverend Matthews who listened to their story without judgment. When Vincent explained that Eleanor had been intended for another marriage but had changed her mind, the preacher simply nodded. "A woman has the right to choose her husband," he said. "If you are both here willingly and of sound mind, I will perform the ceremony." "We are," Eleanor said firmly, "and we want to do it today if possible." Reverend Matthews consulted a pocket watch. "I have no other appointments this afternoon. We will need witnesses. Shall I send for some members of the congregation, please?" Vincent said. Within an hour, they were standing before the altar with two elderly women from the church serving as witnesses. The ceremony was brief and simple, with none of the pomp and circumstance that would have attended Eleanor's wedding to Thomas. But when Vincent slipped a plain gold band onto Eleanor's finger purchased hastily from the jeweler down the street, and the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Eleanor felt a rightness settle into her bones. This was how it was supposed to be. A choice made freely, a partnership entered willingly. Vincent kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation, only certainty. The witnesses applauded, and Reverend Matthews shook their hands warmly. "Congratulations to you both. May you have many happy years together." They had to stop at the land office on their way out of town, so Vincent could register the marriage officially. And that was where they encountered Eleanor's father. Cornelius Blackwell was a large man, red-faced and prosperous-looking, with a watch chain stretched across his considerable middle. He was coming out of the land office just as Vincent and Eleanor were going in, and he stopped dead at the sight of his daughter. "Eleanor." His voice was cold. "So you are alive. Thomas said you had probably died in the storm, but I told him you were too contrary for that. Hello, father." Eleanor's voice was steady, though Vincent could feel her hand trembling in his. "I am sorry for the worry I caused." "Worry? You humiliated me in front of the entire town." "Thomas called off his loan application, and I lost a significant business opportunity because you could not be bothered to do your duty." Cornelius's eyes flicked to Vincent, assessing and dismissive. "Who is this?" "This is my husband, Vincent Sullivan." Eleanor lifted her chin. "We were just married." The red in Cornelius's face deepened to purple. "Your husband? You ran away from a respectable marriage to Thomas Crawford and married some cowboy. Have you lost your mind?" "I married a good man who treats me with respect," Eleanor said. "Something Thomas would never have done. Thomas Crawford is a wealthy businessman with connections throughout the territory. This nobody is a rancher who probably does not have $2 to rub together." Cornelius stepped closer, looming over them. "You will come home with me right now, and we will get this farce annulled. Then you will apologize to Thomas and beg him to take you back." "No," Eleanor's voice rang clear. "I will not. I am married now, legally and before God. I have made my choice." "Then you are no daughter of mine." Cornelius's voice was flat, final. "Do not come crawling back when you realize what a mistake you have made. I am done with you." He pushed past them and strode away down the street, his back rigid with anger. Eleanor swayed slightly, and Vincent wrapped an arm around her waist, supporting her. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "I am fine. I expected no better from him." But her voice was thick with unshed tears. "Let us finish our business and go home." They registered the marriage and picked up supplies at the general store, ignoring the whispers that followed them. By the time they left town, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. They rode in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. "I am sorry about your father," Vincent finally said. "That was cruel of him." "He has always been cruel, just usually in more subtle ways." Eleanor straightened in her saddle, squaring her shoulders. "I am better off without him, without either of them. You have me now, for whatever that is worth." Eleanor reached across the space between their horses and took his hand. "It is worth everything." They arrived home as full dark was falling, and Vincent helped Eleanor down from her horse with a gentleness that made her heart ache. Inside, the house felt different somehow, charged with new possibility. They were married now. This was truly her home, and Vincent was truly her husband. They prepared dinner together, the movements familiar now after weeks of practice. But there was a new awareness between them, a consciousness of what the night ahead would bring. Eleanor felt her pulse quicken every time Vincent's hand brushed hers, every time their eyes met across the table. When the meal was finished and the dishes washed, they stood in the main room, suddenly awkward with each other. "I built you that bedroom," Vincent said. "But if you would prefer, you could share mine. Ours, if you wanted." Eleanor stepped close to him, reaching up to touch his face. "I want to share your bed. I want to be your wife in every way." Vincent swept her into his arms, carrying her to the bedroom as he had carried her that first day, but this time she was warm and laughing, her arms around his neck. He laid her on the bed gently, as if she might break, and she pulled him down beside her. "I will not break," she whispered. "I am stronger than I look. I know you are. You are the strongest person I have ever met." He kissed her softly, then deeper, his hands moving to the buttons of her dress. "Tell me if I do anything you do not like. Tell me if you want me to stop. I will not want you to stop." Eleanor began working on the buttons of his shirt, her fingers fumbling slightly with nervousness and anticipation. "I want this. I want you." They made love slowly, learning each other's bodies with gentle exploration. Vincent was careful with her, attentive to her responses, and Eleanor gave herself over to the pleasure of it, the intimacy of being fully known and fully accepted. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, hearts still racing. "Are you happy?" Vincent asked, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Happier than I knew I could be." Eleanor nestled closer, fitting herself against his side. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for saving me. You saved yourself. You made the choice to run, to choose your own path. I just happened to be there when you needed help. Still, I am grateful." She yawned, exhaustion pulling at her. "I love you, Vincent." The words hung in the air between them, surprising them both. Vincent tightened his arms around her. "I love you too, Eleanor. I think I have from the moment I saw you half buried in that mud, still fighting to live." She fell asleep in his arms, and Vincent lay awake for a long time, marveling at the turn his life had taken. 3 weeks ago he had been alone, resigned to a solitary existence. Now he had a wife, a partner, someone to share his days and nights. The future stretched before him, full of possibility, and he could not wait to see what they would build together. The months that followed were the happiest of Vincent's life. Eleanor threw herself into ranch life with enthusiasm, learning to ride properly, helping with the cattle when she could, managing the household with efficiency and care. She had a head for numbers and took over the ranch accounts, discovering several areas where they could cut costs or increase profits. Under her management, the ranch began to thrive in ways it never had when Vincent worked alone. They talked about everything, sharing their thoughts and dreams over long evenings by the fire. Eleanor wanted to plant a garden in the spring, grow vegetables and flowers. Vincent wanted to expand the herd, maybe buy the adjoining property if it ever came up for sale. They planned and dreamed together, building a shared vision of their future. The town slowly accepted their marriage, though there were always whispers. Thomas Crawford made a few threats in the early days, talking about legal action for breach of contract, but when Vincent confronted him directly, offering to settle the matter with fists if necessary, Thomas backed down. He was a bully, and bullies rarely stood up to someone willing to fight back. Eleanor's father never spoke to her again, passing them on the street without acknowledgement, but Eleanor found she did not mind as much as she had thought she would. She had Vincent, and she had their home, and that was enough. Winter came early that year, snow falling in thick blankets over the ranch. Vincent taught Eleanor how to care for the cattle in winter conditions, how to break ice on water troughs and distribute hay. They worked side by side through the bitter cold, and on the worst days they stayed inside, keeping the fire high and passing the time with cards and conversation and lovemaking that left them both breathless and laughing. It was in February that Eleanor realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when 2 months passed without her monthly courses, she knew for certain. She told Vincent one evening after dinner, simply and directly, and watched his face transform with joy. "A baby," he sounded awed. "We are going to have a baby. In late summer, I think. August or September." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes at his reaction. "Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. Vincent pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she had suddenly become fragile. "You have given me everything, Eleanor. A home, a partnership, and now a child. I do not deserve you. You deserve every happiness." Eleanor pulled back to look at him. "You are going to be a wonderful father." "I hope so. I want to give our child everything I had: loving parents, a stable home, the freedom to choose their own path. We will give them all of that and more." Eleanor rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "We will build something good here, Vincent. A family, a legacy. We already have." The pregnancy was not easy. Eleanor suffered from sickness that lasted well into the 4th month, and Vincent fretted over her constantly, trying to tempt her with different foods, making sure she rested enough. She bore his worry with patience, knowing it came from love. As her belly grew round and her body changed, Vincent seemed to fall more in love with her, marveling at the life they had created together. He worked harder than ever that spring and summer, preparing for the baby's arrival. He built a cradle from oak wood, carving it with careful attention to every detail. He added a room onto the house, a nursery with windows that looked out over the mountains. He saved every penny, building a cushion against emergencies or lean times. Eleanor spent her days preparing as well, sewing tiny clothes and blankets, learning what she could about childbirth and infant care from the few women in town who would speak to her. She was nervous about the birth, having heard horror stories all her life, but she tried not to let Vincent see her fear. He had enough to worry about without adding her anxieties to the burden. In late August, on a sweltering afternoon when the heat hung thick and heavy, Eleanor's pains began. Vincent rode for the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson who had delivered half the babies in the county. She arrived quickly and took charge of the situation with brisk efficiency, banishing Vincent from the bedroom and settling in for what she said might be a long wait. It was long. The pains went on through the afternoon and into the evening, growing stronger and closer together. Vincent paced the main room, helpless and terrified, listening to Eleanor's cries through the closed door. He had faced down rustlers and storms and every hardship the ranch could throw at him, but this was different. This was the woman he loved in pain, and there was nothing he could do to help her. Finally, near midnight, he heard a new sound: the thin, reedy cry of a newborn. Vincent froze, barely breathing, waiting. A moment later the door opened and Mrs. Henderson emerged, smiling. "You have a daughter, Mr. Sullivan, a healthy girl with good lungs." Vincent pushed past her into the bedroom. Eleanor lay against the pillows, pale and exhausted but smiling, a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as he entered, and the love in her eyes nearly brought him to his knees. "Come meet your daughter," she said softly. Vincent approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the baby. She was impossibly small, red-faced and wrinkled, with a downy covering of dark hair. Her eyes were closed, but her mouth worked busily, seeking food. He had never seen anything so perfect in his entire life. "She is beautiful," he whispered. "You are beautiful, you were so brave." "We should name her," Eleanor said. "I was thinking Victoria after your mother." Vincent felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Victoria Sullivan, it is perfect." He carefully took the baby from Eleanor, marveling at her tiny weight, her miniature fingers that wrapped instinctively around his own. "Hello, Victoria. Welcome to the world." Mrs. Henderson showed them how to care for the baby, how to nurse and change and swaddle. She stayed for 3 days, making sure Eleanor was healing properly and that the baby was thriving. By the time she left, Vincent and Eleanor had fallen into the exhausting rhythm of new parenthood, their days measured in feedings and naps and diaper changes. Vincent discovered a tenderness in himself he had not known existed. He would stand over Victoria's cradle for long minutes, just watching her sleep, overcome with protectiveness and love. He changed diapers without complaint, walked her through the house during fussy nights, sang to her in his rough voice until she settled. Eleanor watched him with their daughter and fell in love with him all over again, seeing a side of him she had only guessed at. As Victoria grew, the ranch grew with her. Vincent hired 2 hands to help with the cattle, good men who did their work without drama. The herd expanded to 300 head, then 400. Eleanor's garden flourished, providing vegetables for their table and extra to sell in town. They bought the adjoining property when it came up for sale, expanding their land holdings significantly. The ranch that had been enough for one man became something more, a true homestead, a place of prosperity and life. When Victoria was 2, Eleanor became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring she delivered a son they named Samuel, after Vincent's father. Samuel was quieter than Victoria had been, content to watch the world with solemn eyes. Vincent loved him just as fiercely, this gentle boy who seemed to feel everything deeply. The years passed in a blur of work and joy. Victoria grew into a spirited child who wanted to help with everything, trailing after Vincent as he worked and insisting she could ride a horse before she could properly walk. Samuel preferred the house, staying close to Eleanor and learning to cook and sew alongside her. Vincent loved them both for exactly who they were, never trying to force them into roles that did not fit. When Victoria was 5 and Samuel was 3, Eleanor found herself pregnant once more. This pregnancy resulted in twin girls, Emma and Rose, who arrived early and small but healthy. The house was suddenly full to bursting with noise and life, and Vincent had to add yet another room to accommodate them all. He did not mind. Every addition to the house was a visible sign of their growing family, their expanding love. The children grew up on the ranch, learning the rhythms of cattle and seasons, the value of hard work and the comfort of family. Victoria proved to have her father's skill with horses and cattle, and by the time she was 12 she could rope and ride as well as any of the hired hands. Samuel discovered a gift for mechanics and engineering, forever tinkering with equipment and finding ways to make things work better. Emma and Rose were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and sharing everything, both showing early promise with the artistic skills, Emma with drawing and Rose with music. Vincent and Eleanor watched their children grow with pride and love, marveling at how 4 people could be so different yet all carry pieces of them. They had built something lasting, something that would continue long after they were gone. The ranch was no longer just a business or a home, it was a legacy. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Vincent took Eleanor riding up into the hills above the ranch. to a spot where they could see the entire spread laid out below them. The house looked small from this distance, smoke rising from the chimney. The barn and corrals were neat and well maintained, the pastures dotted with cattle. It was late afternoon, and the children would be wondering where they were, but Vincent had arranged for the hired hands to watch them for a few hours. "Remember when you told me I could build something new?" Eleanor said, leaning against Vincent as they sat on a sun-warmed rock. "That I had time." "I remember. You were right. Look at what we have built." She gestured to the ranch below. "None of this would exist if you had not found me that day, if you had not offered me a place to stay, a new life." "You gave me a new life too," Vincent said. "I was just existing before you came. Going through the motions. You taught me how to live again, how to love." Eleanor turned to kiss him, the gesture familiar after 10 years of marriage but no less meaningful. "I love you, Vincent Sullivan. Thank you for pulling me out of the mud. I would do it again in a heartbeat. I would do anything for you." He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "You are my life, Eleanor. You and the children. Everything I do is for you." They sat together as the sun began to set, painting the sky in the vivid colors of late summer. Below them, their children played in the yard, their laughter carrying faintly on the breeze. The cattle grazed peacefully. The ranch hands finished their evening chores. It was an ordinary moment, unremarkable in its details, but it was everything. This was what Vincent had saved when he had pulled Eleanor from the mud, not just her life, but both their futures, and the lives of the children who would not have existed without that chance meeting. As they rode back down to the house, Victoria ran out to meet them, her face flushed with excitement. "Papa, Mama, one of the mares is foaling. Come quick." They hurried to the barn, where indeed one of their best mares was in labor. The children clustered around at a safe distance, watching with wide eyes as Vincent and Eleanor helped the mare deliver a perfect colt, all long legs and big eyes. Samuel named him Lightning because of a white mark on his forehead, and the children begged to be allowed to help care for him. "You can help," Vincent said, ruffling Samuel's hair. "But remember, it is a big responsibility. Horses depend on us to keep them safe and healthy." "We will be responsible," Victoria promised. "We will take the best care of him." Looking at his children's eager faces, at Eleanor standing beside him with straw in her hair and a smile on her lips, Vincent felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was what it meant to be blessed. Not wealth or status or power, but this a full heart, a loving family, meaningful work, a home that was truly a haven. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Vincent and Eleanor lay in their bed and talked about the future. Victoria would be old enough to take on real responsibilities with the ranch soon. Samuel had mentioned wanting to learn from the blacksmith in town. Emma and Rose were lobbying for a piano so Rose could practice properly. There were always plans, always dreams waiting to be realized. "Do you ever think about that day?" Eleanor asked. "The day we met?" "Sometimes. Mostly I think about how lucky I was to be riding that particular fence line on that particular day. If I had been anywhere else, I would have missed you." "I think we were meant to find each other," Eleanor said. "All the bad choices I made, all the wrong turns, they led me to exactly where I needed to be. To you. I hope I have made you happy. I hope you do not regret choosing me over a life in town." Eleanor propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him in the darkness. "Vincent Sullivan, I have never regretted a single moment with you. You gave me a life I could not have imagined, a love I did not know existed. How could I regret that? You gave me the same." He pulled her down for a kiss. "I love you. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you." They made love slowly, treasuring each other as they always did. The the passion between them not dimmed by years or children or hard work. When they finally drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, both were smiling. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but always underlaid with love and partnership. When Victoria turned 16, a young rancher's son began courting her, and Vincent had to get used to the idea of his oldest child growing up. Samuel apprenticed with the blacksmith and discovered a talent for metalwork that surpassed anything his teacher had seen. The twins were 9 now, inseparable as ever, and Eleanor had finally relented and bought them a piano that now graced the main room. Vincent was 45 now, his hair graying at the temples, his body marked by years of hard work. But he felt younger than he had at 30, energized by his family and the life they had built. Eleanor was 38, and Vincent thought she had never been more beautiful. The years had given her confidence and strength, and she ran the household and much of the ranch business with quiet competence. They still rode up into the hills sometimes, just the two of them, stealing moments alone to remember who they had been before they became parents and ranchers and pillars of the community. On one such ride, when Victoria was 17 and talking seriously about marrying her young man, Eleanor turned to Vincent with a question that had been on her mind. "Are you ready to be a grandfather?" Vincent laughed. "I suppose I do not have much choice in the matter. If Victoria loves him and he treats her well, then I will welcome him into the family. He does seem like a good man, reminds me a bit of you, actually, quiet and steady and kind. Then she has chosen well." Vincent reached across to take Eleanor's hand. "I am proud of her, proud of all of them. We have raised good children." "We have raised children who know they are loved," Eleanor corrected. "That makes all the difference." They had done better than survive, Vincent thought. They had thrived. The scared woman in the mud and the lonely cowboy who had found her had become something more together than they ever could have been apart. They had built not just a ranch but a family, not just a house but a home. Victoria married her young man in the fall, in a ceremony held at the ranch with half the county in attendance. Eleanor cried happy tears as she watched her daughter pledge her life to someone she truly loved, making a choice that Eleanor herself had been denied until Vincent. The newlyweds moved into a small house on the far edge of the property, and Victoria continued helping run the ranch alongside her new husband. A year later, Eleanor became a grandmother when Victoria delivered a healthy boy they named Vincent, after his grandfather. Holding his grandson for the first time, Vincent felt the circle complete itself. He had been found by Eleanor, had given her a family, and now that family was expanding into another generation. The legacy they had built would continue. Samuel finished his apprenticeship and opened his own smithy in town, though he came home frequently to visit and help with ranch work. The twins were growing into young women, still close but beginning to develop their own interests and dreams. Emma talked about becoming a teacher. Rose wanted to study music in San Francisco. Through it all, Vincent and Eleanor remained the steady center, the foundation on which everything else was built. They had arguments. Certainly no marriage was without conflict, but they had learned how to fight fair, how to apologize, how to forgive. They made decisions together, respected each other's opinions, supported each other's dreams. The partnership Vincent had promised her on that first day had become reality, deepened and strengthened by years of shared experience. When Vincent turned 50, Eleanor organized a party that drew people from all over the county. He was surprised by how many considered him a friend, how many lives he had touched without quite realizing it. He had helped neighbors with barn raisings and fence repairs, had loaned money without demanding repayment, had offered advice and assistance freely. The lonely cowboy who had once thought he needed no one had become a valued member of his community. "You have become quite the social creature," Eleanor teased him as they danced at his party. "Whatever happened to the man who could go weeks without talking to anyone?" "I married a woman who dragged me into the world," Vincent said with a smile. "Best thing that ever happened to me." As they danced, Vincent looked around at the gathered crowd. His children and grandchildren. Victoria had given them 2 more grandchildren by now, his friends and neighbors, the ranch hands who had become like extended family. All of this had sprung from that moment in the mud, that choice to help a stranger, that willingness to open his life to someone else. Eleanor followed his gaze and seemed to read his thoughts. "Not bad for a woman you found half dead in a mudslide. Not bad at all." He pulled her closer, ignoring the crowd around them. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Eleanor Sullivan, then, now, and always. And you are mine." She rested her head against his chest, moving with him to the music. "My cowboy who pulled me free and carried me to warmth. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. We saved each other." The party continued late into the night, full of laughter and music and love. When everyone finally left and the house was quiet again, Vincent and Eleanor stood on their porch, looking out over the ranch that had become so much more than either of them had dreamed possible. "You remember," Eleanor said softly, "when I asked you what I should do, where I should go? I remember I told you to stay. Best advice I ever got." She squeezed his hand. "This life, this family, this love, it is everything I never knew I needed. Thank you for seeing it before I did. I saw a woman worth saving. The rest we built together." They stood in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the familiar chorus of crickets and cattle and wind through the trees. Overhead, stars blazed in the clear sky, countless and bright. The future stretched before them still, full of unknown days and years, but they would face it together as they always had. Vincent thought back to that rainy spring day so long ago, when he had ridden out to check fence lines and found something infinitely more valuable than he had been looking for. He thought about the choice he had made to stop, to help, to care. It would have been easy to ride past, to assume someone else would come along, to protect his solitude and his carefully ordered life. But he had stopped, and everything had changed. Sometimes the most important moments in life came disguised as interruptions or inconveniences. Sometimes the best thing you could do was to see past the mud and the rain and the fear to the person underneath, waiting to be saved. Not just from physical danger, but from loneliness and despair and a life half lived. Eleanor had saved him just as surely as he had saved her. She had taught him that opening your heart was worth the risk, that love was not a weakness but a strength, that family was not a burden but a blessing. She had taken a man who was merely surviving and shown him how to truly live. "I love you," Vincent said, the words as necessary as breathing. "Every day for the rest of my life. And I love you." Eleanor turned to kiss him, sweet and lingering. "My husband, my partner, my heart." They went inside together, to the home they had built, to the bed they shared, to the life they had created from nothing but choice and courage and love. Outside, the ranch settled into sleep, the cattle peaceful in their pastures, the horses dozing in their stalls, the land spreading out rich and fertile under the watchful stars. It was a good life. The kind of life worth living, worth fighting for, worth building day by day with patience and purpose. And it had all started with a cowboy and a woman in the mud, 2 lonely souls who found each other at exactly the right moment. As Vincent drifted off to sleep, Eleanor warm and solid beside him, his last thought was one of gratitude, for the storm that had driven her into his path, for the instinct that had made him stop and look down into that ravine, for every choice and chance and circumstance that had brought them together and kept them together through all the years since. In the morning, there would be work to do. There was always work on a ranch. But there would also be breakfast with his wife, visits from his children, laughter and conversation, and the thousand small moments that made up a life well lived. There would be plans to make and dreams to chase and love to share. For now, though, there was this: peace and contentment and the certain knowledge that he was exactly where he was meant to be, with exactly the person he was meant to be with. Vincent Sullivan had found his bride half buried in mud, had pulled her free and carried her to warmth, and in doing so had found warmth for himself. Not just the warmth of fire or shelter, but the warmth of love and family and belonging. It was, he thought as sleep finally claimed him, the best decision he had ever made. And he would make it again, 1,000 times over, every time. Some things were simply meant to be, written in the stars and the earth and the rain that had brought them together. Some loves were worth any price, any sacrifice, any risk. Theirs was one of those loves. Built on mud and courage, tested by time and hardship, strengthened by choice and commitment. A love that had started in a moment of crisis and grown into something strong enough to build a legacy upon. A love that would endure, passed down through generations in the stories they told, and the lives they lived and the family they had created. Outside, the stars wheeled slowly through their ancient patterns. The land stretched out peaceful and productive. The house stood solid and warm, sheltering the family within. And in the master bedroom, Vincent and Eleanor Sullivan slept in each other's arms, content in the knowledge that they had found what so many people searched for their entire lives: a partner, a purpose, and a love that would last forever. The end.